listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Wow, 3.5 minutes late. It's 4 minutes late and everybody starts to panic. Hang on. Sorry, folks, I'm late. I was going to start and say I'm a little late. I was in a conversation that I looked up and said, oh, I got to go. Either let's continue the conversation and I'll have to bail on my radio show tonight, or I'll go do radio. And I was told, go do radio. Let's talk later. So there we are. Now, hopefully, I didn't double check on anything. I want to make sure my audio is all right. Yes, it is. Okay, good. And hopefully you should be hearing me out of the much better microphone now that I am no longer in the Makeshift Studio down in Louisiana. And so this is Scotty Roberts. I'm your host for the Intrepid radio show right here on the Odyssey radio network, although we're not broadcasting quite yet again on Odyssey with the live shows. We're working out the details of the tech on that, and we'll get to that soon enough. But you can go to Odyssey, and you can see the schedule and see all the times that this show plays and replays. And he's been doing rebroadcasts for the last 3 months over on the radio network of the 500 shows that we have archived there. And so welcome to my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And so it's good to be home. I can tell you that. It's not everything I wanted it to be. We didn't do quite as well down in Louisiana as we wanted to. We still have more coming in. And of course, coming home prematurely, we come home with less than we thought we would. And so Rainey and I have Sam staying here with us right now for a few days till he can figure out, he's trying to get a job up here and try to find his own place. And and we're tight quartered already. So send out some good vibes for us as we have to work through all of that. And so there it is. And so that's the home life. And it's busy around here. It's messy around here. We're trying to get our feet back on the ground, waiting for monies to come in that we'll pay from our time in Louisiana. That could be a month before we see that all rolling in. And so that will make it worth the time. And so right now we're just kind of like, I've been gone for 3 months. We spent a lot of money down there trying to stay alive and doing the things we needed to do. We spent more money than we made down there just existing for 3 months. It cost us about $5,000 on the low side, $6,000 on the high side to live down there for 3 months. And I think 6 is high because there are other things that were in there and all of that. But you guys know how that stuff goes. And supporting 2 guys, 2 men. Rainey was back here supporting the home front and supporting our kids, being the single mom. A lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of things going on. And now I'm back home and things don't even out all the time that well. So we're working on that. We're trying to work on getting everything to work the way it's supposed to work. So there is the personal insight into what's going on in the family right now. We're just trying to get our feet back on the ground and make everything work the way it's supposed to work. And being gone 3 months sure does throw a wrench in life's gears. And I appreciate that, Steve, and everybody else. And by the way, hi, everybody. Alan Stiles, good to see you. Field Guy, good to see you. Steve Clark, glad you're in here. Doug Stack, Roger Rabbit, Morgan Snow. Who else we got? Master Finn is here. And Field Guy. And Teresa Dantone, good to see you. And I'm glad everybody's made a Remeldian. Good to see you here. And Doug Stack, of course, was very early tonight. He was the first one in the chat room tonight, long before we even got rolling. And so those of you who are here, Julianne Payne is here. Welcome to the show. And whoever else is here, if I'm missing you, it's not for any other reason than I'm not seeing your name. It's kind of fun doing the live show to acknowledge the fact that you're here. Kenny LaFavor, good to see you. I used to tell Rocky, Kenny LaFarve. He said, don't say that to Kenny. So Kenny LaFavor, good to see you. Glad you're here tonight. I don't know if you've been here before or just not in the chat room. So it's great to see you, Kenny. I'm glad you came in. And so, all right, folks, let's kind of shift toward our topic here. And this comes up because of things that get talked about and the way things are said and all of that. Now, how many of you are in a relationship? How many of you are in a marriage? How many of you deal with the male-female communication in a marriage? How many of you have to deal with things that get said by one side, but maybe not by the other, and the other side says this, but the other side doesn't say that? And by sides, I don't mean oppositional armies. I mean just being on different sides of issues with male-female language, male-female English, male-female perceptions, male-female ways of doing things. How many of you get tired of the other person? How many of you get fed up because the other person did this way when you expected them to do it this way? How many people do you think are out there? How many times have you been in situations where you go, I really want you to do this way, but the other person says, I have a different opinion than that. What do you do as a couple when you run into those stone walls in relationships? And so talking about things today with Rainey, talking about things that have been going on, the way we're trying to balance the books, the way we're trying to make everything work. Of course, there's always divisiveness that comes up. Things that are, one person wants to be heard, or the other person wants to impose being heard on the other person and doesn't allow the other person to speak. Those things go on in relationships. So how do you find yourself handling those kinds of things? Doug Stack says, I get upset when my wife doesn't give things a chance. Well, that's it. There is some of that. There are different expectations in marriage. There are different expectations among individuals. And when you pledge your life to somebody and you become part of that person, you have kids with them many times, all of a sudden, it's like you guys either have to work things together or you don't work them at all and you fail at it. And so what's the options that you have when you run into the brick walls where things don't work as well as they should? Or you can't seem to work out things as well as they should. Or you have a conversation and one person runs to another room and doesn't want to listen to you speak. But that person might have everything to say to you and you give them the floor to speak. So what do you do in those situations when you have inequality in communication? Because one person thinks they're always right, or thinks they're right most of the time, or has a tough time admitting that they're not right all of the time. It doesn't matter if it's the husband or the wife. If you're in a relationship where that's going on, you have to ask yourself the big question, which Rainey and I asked when we went to counseling years ago. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be married? And what if you come back with the answer, well, I just don't want to be married anymore? Does that mean that you are forfeiting marriage and life together and making things work because you can find the happier life somewhere else? You can find a happier life doing something else, or being with somebody else, or being on your own, or living at your mom's house or your dad's house, or doing whatever you want to do. So what is it that drives you to make your decisions in your marriage? The topic I wanted to bring up tonight was one that is, it's really all about this emotional hostage taking. I am going to hold our marriage over your head if you don't agree with me and do things the way I want. Or because you have done things the way I wouldn't do them, I'm so fed up with you. Our marriage is being hung out on the stick in front of your face. The marriage being the carrot. Do you know people like that? Have you been in those situations before where those things happen? And so holding the relationship hostage is what I wanted to talk about tonight. For example, if someone feels like you've been cold to them, instead of saying, I feel like you're being cold sometimes, they'll say, I can't be with you because you're cold to me. It's crucial for both people in a relationship to know that negative thoughts and feelings can be communicated safely to one another without it threatening the relationship itself. You don't have to hang the relationship out there and hold it out there as a threat because you want the other person to believe exactly what you believe or agree with every point you're saying. That is holding relationship hostage. So how do you hold a relationship hostage? Do you do it? Do you blame your partner? Is it kind of this idea of you blame your partner for your own emotions about something? This is a subtle form of selfishness. It's a classic example of the poor maintenance of personal boundaries. So take responsibility for your own emotions and expect your partner to be responsible for theirs. And then you have to gauge, am I placing the blame on the other person because I believe that they aren't doing things the way I think they should have been done? Or are you placing it there because you are the one that has an issue with your own emotional structure? So these are questions you have to start asking when this comes up. Blaming your partner for things. Do you keep a relationship scorecard? Any of you use those in your relationships? This is when you and your partner continue to blame each other for past mistakes made in the relationship instead of solving the problems together. So you got to deal with issues individually unless they're legitimately connected somehow. So do you hold your relationship to a scorecard? Oh, you've done this, this, and this that I don't like. And when you're keeping score, do you keep score of the positives as well as the negatives? Or do you just keep a negative scorecard on the other person? And then you use that against them when you're disgruntled about something. So this is the big question. What's an emotional hostage? What do you think it is to hold emotional hostages in a relationship? Somebody go ahead and spell that out in the chat room. What do you think that involves? What do you think that looks like? Doug Stack says, that doesn't happen, thankfully, in my marriage. Morgan Snow says, didn't Scotty have a show about expectations? Yeah. What are your expectations? What if your partner falls short of your expectations? Does that mean, oh, you shit can them? What happens when that happens? It's our expectations of other people. So there's emotional hostages. 4 ways to tell what emotional blackmail is. Now, have any of you been blackmailed emotionally? Do you recognize what I mean when I say that? Do you know what emotional blackmail is? I'll give you a really quick, good example. Unless you do things my way, I will end the marriage. That's emotional blackmail because you're using the marriage, you're holding the marriage in hostage, and you're blackmailing the other person with everything, your negative scorecard about what you believe they've done right or wrong. And so imagine this scene. You're on the phone with a friend. They've made you angry, and in your fight, you told them that you just want to be left alone for a bit. You say they aren't allowed to come to your house until further notice, and that's when the dam breaks. They tell you that if you don't let them come over, they'll drive their car off a cliff. And this makes you panic. You don't want to be the reason they do something like that, so you agree to allow them to come over right then. And while this might seem far-fetched as a scenario, it is in fact an example of emotional hostage-taking. You will either do this the way I want it done, or I will do this. So this is sometimes referred to as emotional blackmail and is in fact a form of abuse. Now, by offering up this short list of 4 things, I want to bring light to a form of emotional abuse many don't even know exists. And if you notice similarities to the above scenario, I mean, the scenario I already gave you, a little far-fetched, but you get the point. If you see similarities to that or any of the points listed about what I'm going to talk about now, these 4 points, you've got to perhaps go talk with the professional about these things. The situation may seem benign right now, but it can escalate very quickly. So let's go through these. Number 1, understanding what emotional blackmail really is. Emotional blackmail is when people in your life use fear, obligation, and guilt to manipulate you to do what they want you to do. It's a tactic used by abusers to threaten you to get what they want out of you. The point is to make you feel fog, fear, anger, guilt, all of those things are in this fog. And so that they can have things done their way, by their rule, by their control, by their expectation. And this might be something as simple as throwing a fit as an adult to get out of something, throwing a fit to get out of something, getting out of a conversation, throwing a fit, going hiding in a closet and plugging your ears, things like that. Or it could be a case of threatening to go back to drug use if they don't see someone or be somewhere they want to be. The whole point is to refuse to take responsibility for their own actions, their own obligations, their own commitments, their own responsibilities, and instead blame the other person or threaten to blame the other person for every bad decision that they could ever have made if they don't get their way. So that's the first thing. That's emotional blackmail. Any of you experienced that with anybody? Do you recognize that? Teresa says it can be very unhealthy. I don't know if you were mentioning what I was talking about per se, but maybe some other things in the chat room. So those of you who've come in a little later, Corey Blake, welcome to the show. Sterling, Macabre Menace, gaslighting, he says. Yes, gaslighting is one. Elderberry, good to see you. Robert V, good to see you as well. David Castle, good to see you. Thanks for being here in the show. And so, mine said she'd sell all my cars, Doug. She'd sell all my shit, Doug, cars included. Well, there you go. So, let's move on to the second point. Knowing what constitutes an emotional hostage situation is important here. What is an emotional hostage situation, and how do you recognize it? So, by the definition that I gave a little bit earlier, it could be easy to assume that all children take their parents hostage emotionally. Our kids do that to us all the time, don't they? There's the use of the term blackmail can elicit a really negative response about this fear, this obligation, this guilt that we have. Fear, obligation, and guilt, the fog. And such a term as emotional blackmail equates to there being forethought from the individual, or premeditation, if you will. And so this is often not the case. And the things that the people are wanting are, in fact, legitimate things to desire. If they want the things that they expect from you, those aren't illegitimate things. And so many times these things aren't premeditated when the emotional baggage gets thrown out. The emotional blackmail gets out. The dangling carrot of the thing that they know you want the most. And they say, you don't want that, and they dangle it in front of your eyes, and I'm going to take that away from, I just took that away from you. That's their way of, in the moment, acting. And a child throwing a tantrum in a store to get a toy isn't necessarily emotionally blackmailing the parent, as they're merely subject to driven. They're merely, as they are merely subject to their drives, and they have no concept of the manipulation factor. A teenager exploding emotionally over not being able to borrow the car and then running off to their room with a knife is an emotional hostage situation. They want to get something, and they'll make it appear that they will injure themselves to get it. If the parent gives in, then the manipulation worked, and their actions are reinforced. If the parent doesn't give in, then they'll worry about their child and feel immense guilt if their child follows through with the threat. So Doug says, now my wife gets mad at me, but I don't think there's ever been a time we didn't speak to each other for a day. We've been married for 9 years. Yeah. Rainey and I get mad at each other. Now, I'm not the kind of person, you guys know me by listening to this radio show. I would rather talk through a situation, get it worked out, rather than let it stew overnight. I don't like stewing about things. I don't like throwing out expectations or throwing out nasty things in order to get the other person to do my will, or just to express that I'm so fed up with you and your ways that I'm done. That's not my way. So Rainey could go for a day, and Rainey, the way she comes back on these things, she usually doesn't come back in overtly. It's usually subtle ways to come back and say, okay, let's talk about this. We're different people. So you also have to know where your emotional boundaries lay. And so by knowing your emotional boundaries, knowing what they are and where they are, you're going to be able to tell when somebody oversteps them. In the early stages of this form of abuse, you might not even register that something is truly amiss in your relationship. You may just assume that the other person is passionate about something and therefore gets carried away at times. And as time goes on, you might start to feel like the other person places you between a rock and a hard place. Either option you have is a bad one, but you tend to favor those that are the lesser of the two evils. And this is emotional manipulation at its finest. What you want isn't important. It's about what the other person can do to elicit the emotional response that they want out of you. That's what that's all about. So you need to be able to set up the emotional boundaries. And those emotional boundaries are very important for you to have. And that might not be necessarily setting up and telling the other person I have these boundaries. It's that you internally, you've got your emotional boundaries. And you got to know when they get crossed, when they're being breached, when somebody's attacking the wall. And you got to just be careful. You got to set up the boundary and say, I'm not going to be drawn into that. And so, number 4, you are where your feelings lie. What did David Castle say? Greetings and favor to you, Helene. David Castle must have said something. If you give in to blackmail once, then it'll be used against you forever. Get it over and cut the cord. There it is. Helene, I'm glad I'm home too. Thank you very much. Sam is too. Sam was very happy getting here. He's had a good time with his little brother and sisters the last 2 days. We've been home for 2 days. And so he's feeling good being home, working on getting a job, working on finding a place to be and finding a place to live. Because he can only stay here for so long. We just don't have the room. We don't even have an extra room for him. So he's working on these things so he can be out on his own. So folks, here's something I'm going to do. This is going to work us kind of back into getting back to the Odyssey live shows. We're going to go out to a break. It's the bottom of the hour. We're going to take about a minute break. So you guys all sit tight. And guess what? We'll be right back.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Hey folks, we're back. Thanks for waiting on through that break, for paying attention to that break. That's what I do. That's my ad for myself. So thanks for watching it. And there's going to be more of that coming up, of course, as we get back into doing the live broadcast. So thank you for being here. This is the second half of the show coming on tonight. I don't know if we'll go late or overtime tonight or not, or if we'll just, being in the live format and on YouTube, it lends itself to not going overtime or to going overtime. Because, when I'm doing the show and it's on the radio station and we have certain time limits for the segments, well, that can lend itself very easily to not having any kind of overtime at all. So anyway, there we are. We're getting back into the norm of things, the flow of things. So go visit my website. Check it out. And so, hey, Gaza, good to see you. Nice to have you in here. Who else did I see that seemed to slip in? Oh, nobody. I was just seeing. Oh, James, there you are. James, good to see you as well. Now, Doug says you could try to sharpen that knife and never get it sharp. I realized how stupid I was and started laughing. Oh, we kissed and made up. Okay, that's the end of a story. Sorry about that, Steve. I didn't see the beginning of that. Doug said something. My wife puts up walls. I tell her, work it out, and she'll tell me when she's ready. I don't pry. It's just not in my nature, Doug says. And so, yeah. And so I tend to, for the longest time, I went through a very long time, a learning curve. And when my wife gets what would be to me a guy weird, maybe to her, it's normal. And maybe other women would go, yeah, she's absolutely right. But for a guy, I have to back off sometimes. Sometimes it gets to you and you go, damn it, don't walk away and slam a door on me again. Those are the kinds of things and the phases we go through in these things. And so, hey, Joe, good to see you. Glad you're in the show. Glad you're over there in the chat room. And so it's good to see you. And Delaney, good to see you as well. Thanks for being here. And so as we're looking at this topic, I'm going to go back in and pick up with that fourth point where we left off. You are where your feelings lie when it comes to a relationship. So someone who holds you hostage emotionally is going to hold you accountable for their feelings. They're making you the scapegoat for the way they feel. Their emotional, perhaps, unhealth is something that they won't take on themselves. They won't look at themselves, but they'll find a convenient reason to blame it on the other person. And they hold that person, what that whole person might hold the most dear, gets used as blackmail against them. It's hostage taking. And they will bring up many times reasons that have nothing to do with the reality of a situation because they look for the weapons in the arsenal. Now, does this make that person a bad person? No. It means it makes that person somebody who has something emotionally that needs to be dealt with that they're venting through totally different means. And they may take remember I talked about scorecards? They're taking their scorecard against you. They're keeping score. Oh, you infracted here. You didn't do this here. You didn't do what I said there. You are off the mark there. And they will use that scorecard and say, oh, you lost. I'm done. I'm done taking scores. So because they can't take scores anymore, they'll exit. That's emotional blackmail. That's holding your partner to emotionally hostage. And so this might take the form of a significant other stating that a breakup from you would cause them to commit suicide, or a breakup from you would cause them to be the most happy they've ever been. You might see this as them being so in love with you that they would rather die without you. Now, that's an extreme case, and that's not the case. They're manipulating you to get what they want. The point is to hold you accountable for the feeling of sadness that would follow a breakup. They may be feeling anxious about the relationship, but instead of facing those fears head on with you, they force you to carry them for them, and they make you the scapegoat for their ugly feelings about the way things aren't working. So being an emotional hostage can and will take its toll on a person. Their relationships will suffer. Their emotional well-being is going to suffer. And they can become miserable overall. And sometimes we don't see these things sneaking up on us. We're then left to pick up the pieces afterwards when things go off course. And understanding what being held hostage emotionally and emotional blackmail really means is a great start. But remember, just because someone makes you feel guilty for something, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're manipulating you. It all has to do with how the present situation, and the past experiences. So have you been in a situation of emotional blackmail before, any of you? And if you have, are you comfortable with sharing your story? You can. Some of you have already. Some of you are saying things. I'm looking at some of the things that Scotty cheated on his show sometime, says Doug. I heard him on another program today, but I don't know when it was recorded. I have no idea when that was. I just saw my alarm go off. I've got another program, an interview I have to do tomorrow. I got to double check and see who is it, because it's not on my alarm. So I got to go check my calendar. So you'll hear another one coming up, Doug. Let's see. People with anger issues usually have more of their own personal problems. Robert V., that's very true. People who have anger issues are usually people that are buried in their own emotional baggage about things. And they try to place that on the other person. They try to, what's the word I want to use? They try to manipulate really you into being the reason for the problems. So, there are 9 telltale signs of manipulative behavior like this. And it took us a half hour and a little bit spilling over after the bottom break to get through just 4. Let's see what we can do with this. So a common misconception is that manipulative behavior is always outwardly visible. But this isn't true. Manipulation can happen in very subtle ways. And you have to look for the more subtle signs of manipulative behavior. And there's 9 signs for it. Not all of them might occur in the cases of manipulative behavior, but at least beware when you spot significant amounts of them. Number 1, that person that's using manipulative behavior, they somehow always say the right thing. The frustrating thing about consciously manipulative people is that they're usually quite good at working out where a person's emotional vulnerabilities lie. They find the chink in the emotional armor and they stick the dagger in and they twist it, or they pry that open further. And they pick out what could be a soft spot for that person and somehow always know what to say around them to get what they want. And it's all about emotions. They're doing things to drive you or manipulate you to do what they want you to do, to fulfill their expectation. Now, like I said earlier, sometimes the expectations aren't bad things, but it's the way people interact with each other. Second thing is, they're too smooth. There's a difference between smooth talking and manipulative talking. Now, are you tempted to do something you didn't want to do at first because they worked you into it in a way that feels like it's been oddly compared to normal convincing, like a friend would do? Does it feel that they would be angry or leave you if you didn't do the thing they're making you do? Then it could be a case of manipulation. Or what if somebody says, you're doing this thing and therefore I'm going to leave you? And you go, wait a minute, and do that thing. I think there's a misconception here. So what's the manipulation there? So, number 3, possessive manipulative behavior. Do they act weird when you hang out with other people? Do they in any way try to make you dependent on them for approval? That's a manipulative person. Number 4, words without actions. If people constantly say, you're so important to me, you would expect them to act like they feel that way as well. But if someone is constantly showering you with sweet whisperings, but hardly ever has any actions to show that they actually feel those things, or they only really approach you when they need something, it might just be manipulation. Number 5, they push with manipulative behavior. Manipulative people know boundaries, but they also know how to stretch or even cross the boundary. The feeling that someone is pushing you further and further from where you started off, perhaps even until you're not comfortable anymore. Do you find it increasingly hard to tell them no in fear of rejection or abandonment? And this also applies to physical boundaries with people. 6, they rarely apologize for anything, if ever. People who constantly display manipulative behavior are also good at manipulating or explaining situations in such a way that it's never really their fault for anything that's gone wrong. It's always the other person's fault. So they don't ever need to apologize for anything. Because of what they rarely feel, because of that, they rarely feel the need to honestly apologize. They're also skilled at trying to change the topic when somebody's rightfully criticizing them. You ever been with somebody who will go way out of their way and overemphasize how critical they are of you, but the moment you open your mouth and say, hey, wait a minute, that's not the way it is, I see it differently, and they walk away from you, they don't give you the opportunity to speak. It's manipulative. It's emotional blackmail as well. 7, home is where a manipulator plays their best game. Do you always have to interact with them in a space that's more theirs than yours? You've been told, I'm the king or queen of this roost, and this is my place, and you got to do what I say. Now, whether it's their office, their car, their home, their desk, if they hardly ever interact with you outside of a space that's essentially theirs, it's time to reassess things. And this is important in considering manipulative behavior because it would give them the home court advantage, a subtle way of establishing dominance. Number 8, displaying negative emotions is in an unusual way is what they do. Sometimes people who display manipulative behavior tend to raise their voice at odd moments. It's like, whoa, when did this go from 0 to 60 in 2.3 seconds? Why did it go there? They also get more angry than average at relatively small things, which messes up your baseline of what's acceptable behavior. Speaking loudly can also serve as a way to establish dominance and gain psychological advantage. Negative or degrading humor can also be used by manipulators to accomplish a similar effect. And the manipulator, the emotional blackmailer, they always give you little or no time to decide. This is number 9. They give you little or no time to decide. This is also used in a lot of sales tactics. By imposing a time-related deadline, the manipulator puts pressure on you before you're really ready to make a choice or have even been able to think it through and find your best course of action. They give you very little respect and very little chance to consider the situation in the hope that you'll crack and give in to them. And then they will take your words and twist them to make sure that they can make you the object of their negativity. So, these are the 9 telltale signs of manipulative behavior when people work to blackmail you emotionally or hold you hostage emotionally. Signs of manipulation are very subtle. If you have a gut feeling, at least try to talk to somebody about it. So, there's all these things that we have that are the things that I thought about it tonight because, my wife and I, we argue. And sometimes the gloves come off and sometimes we have to talk about things. And so you have to think about, am I being manipulative of my wife? Am I emotionally blackmailing her somehow? Is my wife emotionally blackmailing me? And sometimes we got to talk about those things. Maybe not always in those terms, but we got to think about how these things work. Let's see. I'm looking at some of the. James says, Saturday afternoon, I had a good neighborly conversation about grilling with neighbors. Pregnant baby mama. I didn't know that my completely respectful conversation with her was offensive to him. As that happens. Sometimes you can't sweat the small stuff. What we're finding out in our culture today, it's impossible not to offend somebody with anything you could possibly say. And so sometimes you just got to say what you're thinking, not being crass or brazen or tactless, but if they get offended, I'm sorry, I can't bend over backwards to make sure I don't offend anybody at all. So, of all things, I was looking at a site called womensdivorce.com, helping you overcome the challenges when you might be facing divorce. And I was looking at emotionally abusive relationships, what constitutes that, and how to reclaim your power. Emotionally abusive relationships can drain everything about yourself until there's very little left of the strong woman or the man that you used to be. But you can learn coping tools to help manage the verbal abuse in marriage, to deal with the controlling behavior, and ultimately take back your power. So you got to take a look at a few things here. How to manage Darth Vader and Cruella de Vil in 7 steps, so to speak. And so what happens again? You're left upset. You're left hurt. You're left bewildered. You're disoriented. And let's not forget, maybe a little scared about some things. And if someone were to ask you, how are things? Or what's new? The last thing you'd want to do is reply, I've just been abused and I'm not sure what to do. So denial, the ever-powerful emotion that's often the coping tool of choice, keeps us in place and wondering what to do next. I love pretending all was well all the time in past relationships I've had. I was ashamed, I was humiliated to be in such a difficult position, thinking that I could just ignore my problems away. And you know what? Guys get abused as often as women do. Because guys take it out more physically than women. So there are abuses out there of several kinds. Hey, Leslie, welcome to the show. I know couples where there have been successful couples with a few kids. They work hard to live the American dream. They had careers. They owned successful companies, some of them. They made more money than each other, than other people. And they had friends and family. So what none of those friends and family knew was that these people were suffering an abusive relationship. And they were slowly coming apart. And so arguments, assaults surfaced day by day, year after year. And some of these people wake up and they realize they're in quite a predicament. My belief is that deep down, we know what's going on. People just don't have any means of handling some of the challenges, and they're left with extreme options. Either deny what's happening or dramatically address the situation and publicly handle abuse. So some people think, I can't call an abuse hotline. There's other simple solutions. And the fear led to therapy, which led these people to coping tools, which led them to come up with ways to manage verbal assaults and controlling behaviors. And it worked. And these people were able to learn the steps, manage themselves in the situation. This person I know took the kids, took the dog, took the cats, took the fish, and left. It was a rough ride, but they got out of the tunnel. And their work was dedicated to those who weren't in situations that seemed to be endless and full of suffering. But there are 7 steps you got to look at here for people that have been in this situation. Yeah, it turns very quickly from mental to physical, Teresa. So James says, lucky for her, not sure how much our interaction and his response played. She left him Sunday. There you go. So here's 7 things. Buckets and boundaries. Buckets and boundaries. All of us have our own path and our own responsibilities to manage. And I think of them as our own bucket of stuff that we've got, or shit, you can say. So just like your friend or your spouse, your mom, your dad, your sister, your boss, your brother, etc., they all have their own stuff in their own buckets. And so do you. So do I. So does Rainey. So does everybody. So understanding that we're as responsible for our world and our issues or our bucket just as the other person is, helps give you the space you need to create boundaries. And boundaries are going to help you create some distance between their happiness, their issues, their keeping them calm, etc., and yours. And instead of you worrying about keeping them happy, calm, and etc., whatever the demand of the day is, your job is to take care of your bucket of shit and your own issues. You're not here to be a conduit for somebody else's peace of mind or their happiness or their calm, just as they aren't here for you, for yours. Now, that doesn't mean we don't work together. Happy people, happy couples find ways with their own personal boundaries to work together. I'm talking about when you're in abusive situations. Number 2, I statements. When you own your communication, you begin the process of taking back your power and not responding to demands, to allegations, to insults, to threats. You use your I statements, and that's as easy as saying, I don't want to get into the car with you when you're yelling at me, versus saying, you're pissing me off when you yell at me and I can't take that anymore. So the mere use of the word you puts someone else on the defensive. We've heard this for a long time. Don't say, you're doing this and therefore I can't. And you say, I can't do this because I can't do this. Keep it personal. So this isn't about being right or wrong. It's about taking care of yourself and learning how to step aside from verbal assaults. So number 3, give it a big mental whatever. It took me, whatever. It took a long time for me to realize that if a question was asked of me and an answer was demanded, that I could make the choice and not answer. When someone's coming at you, my terms for how verbal abusers engage in demanding and threatening behavior with their words, they're often working to get you to talk to them so they can argue and attack you. And to get you to talk to them, they will often ask you questions. If you're in a verbally abusive relationship, you'll try to answer and try to explain, all to no avail. Instead of engaging, try meeting every demand or comment with a whatever and simply let it go, realizing this is easier said than done. I used to write this out on pieces of paper and carry them with me. And it was a great reminder that I could just disengage rather than try to get them to reason with me. Now, there's also the flip side of that. people will sometimes use the walking away not as a boundary, but as a way to shut out the other person. So there's that side of it too. So you cannot X them out of this, is number 4. You can fill in the blank of X with the word love or reason or logic, and they all work the same. If you're with an abuser, you're not going to be able to love them anymore, or love them more to change the situation, or reason with them to get to see what's going on, or, my favorite, logically address an illogical argument. There's no way to logically address an illogical argument. It simply isn't going to happen. The loving thing to do for you and for them is to stop the cycle and end the pattern and disengage on it. Number 5, you have to watch your self-talk. So many times when we're in emotionally abusive relationships or situations, we start incorporating some of the same damaging words we've heard in our daily thoughts. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe I really am not good enough. Maybe my family is really awful. Or maybe I should listen to this other person because they know really who I am and how to love me. When you get verbally abused, you can write out what was said, and you could look at it the next day, and often getting the space you needed to get out of the moment would create some time for the psyche to heal. As I would read the words the next day, I would inflammatory or off base. And the challenge is that if you hear these insults, these accusations continuously, they often become part of the fabric of your daily self-talk of who you are. I'm quiet until I calm down, says Leslie, and I can discuss it without attacking my husband. I refuse to say words in anger. Once spoken, you can't take them back. And you know what, Leslie, I'll tell you something. If you are prone to saying things in anger to the other party, you better be damn hopeful that the other party is somebody who can be understanding. So get over it. Teresa says, great, Scotty and I just shut him down, closed the door, adios. So there it is. Number 6, feed your mind. Actively find positive books, tapes, people, situations, anything you can do to radio shows to counteract the negative impact and the effects that the verbal abuse is having on your mindset. Thankfully, there are resources everywhere for this stuff. So this type of information is easily found. And a good way to think of this is that if you were around someone else and heard what happened to them, you'd be upset, appalled, probably concerned for their well-being. And if you could help them, you would probably recommend they do something positive for themselves. Love yourself enough to do this for you. There's no shame in being abused. You're a victim, period. So number 7, watch for the dripping faucet. If your kitchen faucet drips, no biggie. You get it fixed and all's well. If your kitchen faucet drips day after day, month after month, year after year, nothing is done to fix it. It's going to rust out. Eventually, they'll have big holes in them, your pipes. So creating the perspective of looking at things for what they are versus what you want them to be is key to moving you along. If you experience abuse, you can often excuse the behavior because they had a bad day or they don't understand what you were trying to explain. And yet we all know that with controlling people and abusers, the put-downs, the manipulations, the assaults happen over and over and over and over again. And sometimes the fights aren't as bad, and sometimes they're treacherous. But either way, it's the quiet continuance of fights and issues that will often lead us to think that this is our normal world and maybe this isn't so bad, having to endure this bullshit. So give yourself the gift of validating what's happening, not excusing behavior. It's what it is, and no one deserves to be abused or controlled in any way. And so a gentle reminder that this does not define you. You're worthy. You're valuable. It's not an accident that you're here. You got to take back your personal power and love yourself for all that you are. Sorry to sound so, I don't want to sound new agey there, but this is what we have to do. And if you can't do it for you, do it for your children, for your grandchildren, for your parents, for your pet, for humanity as a whole. So there are things that you have to do to make this stuff not be the hold on your life. And it's just, and these things are really hard to cope with for some people. And so sometimes you just have to let it go. So there's a bunch of things. How is your relationship? How do you deal with people in your relationships? Look at it. Work for the best, the better good of both of you. But also make sure you do the things to protect yourself when you have to. So there you go, folks. That's all I got. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for giving me your time. I appreciate that. Good to see you all over here in the chat room. I appreciate that. So with that, I'm just going to say, hey, live long and prosper and have a good night.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.